Thank you so much, Lenka. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me along today to chat to you about unlocking PR opportunities during pandemic. It's very nice to be here, and it's actually my first ever presentation via Zoom. So I've got over my initial panic about the technology with Lenka, and hopefully everything is going to work well enough, but I'm sure Lenka will let me know if there are any issues. So I'm just going to share my screen now, and hopefully you will all be able to see the presentation. So I will start off with a little bit about myself, just to let you know my background and sort of what I've been up to these last sort of 15, 20 years. God, I'm confessing how old I am now. I started my PR career more than 15 years ago, representing brands, rights holders, sponsors, national governing bodies, and have worked in both an agency and in-house capacity. My career sort of started at two London PR agencies, Exposure and Freud's, where I represented a number of household name brands and businesses. I then moved in-house and specialised in sport and entertainment. So I was head of PR at Great British Racing for a while. I managed the global comms for a number of drinks brands in the Pernod Ricard portfolio. And then my most recent employed job was as communications director for News UK's Wireless Group, which is their radio business with brands such as Virgin Radio and TalkSport. 3 years ago, I left London and moved up to Saffron Walden. And with that, I decided to take the plunge, quit working for someone else, and start up my own business, which is called Neon Brand Communications. So I'm based here in Saffron Walden, and I work with businesses including Great British Racing, England Rugby, and a lovely radio business in Oxfordshire called Jack. Kind of work differs every day, so it may be strategic sort of comms plans or crisis communications, or it may be consumer PR planning and activation. So every day is different, which is one of the things that I love about my job. And certainly there have been lots of challenges of these last few weeks, but with that lots of positives, and hopefully I'll be able to share a few hints and tips that will help you with your own businesses going forward, and hopefully we're on a sort of upward curve of positivity now, so things will sort of start to get slightly easier, because obviously it's been pretty challenging for everyone. So without wanting to patronise anybody, because you probably know this already, but I thought it was very important just to very briefly touch on what PR actually is. There are lots of different definitions, and I think the lines are quite blurred sometimes. So for me, I would probably say that the easiest way to distinguish the two is PR is earned versus paid for. So essentially, if you are advertising, you are buying the space. So any brand, any business can go out and buy that space themselves. Whereas for PR, you're earning your position in the newspaper and the magazine on the online platform that you're working with. The other way of looking at it is it's kind of credible versus skeptical. I'm not knocking advertising here, because obviously it plays a very, very important role in the marketing of our brands and businesses. But PR communicates with its audiences via trusted, not paid sources. So it's independently verified. So if you think about the sorts of things that you read and you consume, you can see very clearly when it's an advert versus when you're reading something that perhaps a journalist you respect and you trust. When that journalist is saying, this is good, you believe what they're saying. Equally, when they say this is bad, you believe what they're saying as well. And this is where you have to be quite careful with PR, because if you put your brand or business forward to a journalist, they are going to give an honest response. And that is why the power of PR is so valuable, because it's somebody saying they think that this is a good story, they think it's a good product, they think it's a good service, versus an advert that the brand has gone out and paid for themselves. PR is about persuasion. So essentially, a good PR person should be good at storytelling. They can protect, enhance, or build your reputation. So they find the positive messages in your story, in your product, in your business, and they turn them into stories. So things that people will be interested in learning about and hearing about. Equally, they can also formulate the best response for bad stories, so helping you to mitigate the damage. So if you do ever find yourself in a difficult situation with perhaps something that is in the public domain or is going to be in the public domain, a good PR person can help you to manage that and to mitigate the negative impact for your brand or business. And given that this is predominantly a social media forum, I just thought I'd mention that social media doesn't replace traditional PR, but it can help to amplify it further. So think of social media as another platform for your PR story or opportunity. And we'll come on to sort of how best and where those PR stories can live. So moving on, this is a lovely quote from Danny Rogers, who is the editor of PR Week. And this is specifically to do with PR in the pandemic. And Danny says, this could be our finest hour. And that is really important. I think when the coronavirus pandemic first hit, everything stopped because it was panic and no one knew kind of what to do. And, you know, people were worrying about activity. But now things have picked up. Things have really kind of carried on, and we've seen a real shift in kind of what brands are doing and how they're supporting the coronavirus pandemic. I think perhaps creative consumer communications was probably the hardest hit part of the PR landscape, because it's spring. Normally now we'd be planning for events and experiential activations and things that get our brands and our businesses into the hands of consumers. But instead, we've seen widespread cancellations and all of these things coming to a close because they can't happen. But news desks are still crying out for content, and there are kind of two areas of focus in terms of the content that is interesting right now for newspapers, magazines, and for journalists. And that is either content that is linked to coronavirus, so content that provides insight. So it might be data, it might be information about our retail choices, it might be emotive insight, it might be personal kind of experiences from business that's linked to the pandemic. All of this stuff is really interesting and newsworthy right now. And on the same level, also, they're looking for stuff that gives us a bit of a break from coronavirus. We don't want to be consuming information about the pandemic 24/7. So there is also an opportunity to look to create opportunities that link to giving us a bit of a break, whether that's creating something that is going to keep families and people happy and entertained when they're at home, whether it's, you know, an interesting video that they can watch. This is the sort of content that has an opportunity right now. And while it is vital that we're creative about this, you know, everyone's kind of clamoring for a bit of visibility at the moment. What the lockdown has forced us to do, which I think is a really good thing, is to focus on what's important and to find inspiration from our surroundings. And what that equals are campaigns that are more relatable. They are more honest. People can kind of watch or engage with them and thinking, yeah, I can relate to this in this time. And PR can also be channel agnostic. So, for example, if you were to look at, you know, the social media usage through the lockdown, it's gone completely through the roof, obviously. So therefore, when you're planning a PR campaign and you're thinking about what channels your PR campaign can live on, certainly incorporate social media in that, you know, as I'm sure many of you would, but obviously it's a way of kind of capitalising on that usage at the moment. So just to bring it to life in kind of 4 campaigns that I just thought I'd share with you to demonstrate the sorts of things that I'm referencing. These are 4 kind of campaigns that have been very successful for very different reasons. So in the top left, we have Ladybird Books' Little Big Moments campaign. Now this is a really nice, very simple mechanic that taps into the emotiveness of the fact that we're separated from people that we love. So Ladybird have pledged to give away a set of matching books every day during lockdown. It's a very simple online competition mechanic, and they will then send that set of matching books to two people that are separated so that they can read a bedtime story together. So whether it's a grandma and a grandchild, or a parent and child, they can read that bedtime story together, which is really, really vital, and people will remember that. On the top right hand side, you have Reading Golf Course. Now, this was a really nice sort of regional story that went national. Reading Golf Course opened up their golf course for members of the public to exercise on. So although it looks there very, very rural, lots of countryside, it's actually very, very near to Reading city centre. There are lots of people who have very small or no gardens at all and lack that access to open green space. So Reading Golf Course said, come and use our golf course for exercise, adhere to social distancing, bring your dogs, take them for a walk. And that was a really, really nice campaign. And it actually went national because after they announced that they were going to be doing this, MPs took up the debate whether or not golf courses in their area should be forced to open up their green spaces for people to exercise. So Reading was kind of at the front of that trend, and I think by doing that, they've created really, really good goodwill amongst their local audience. So perhaps people who may never have thought about playing golf would now be more open to it when the opportunity arises. So kind of quite clever, cost them nothing, gave them a PR opportunity, and will really resonate and be remembered by that audience. Bottom left, we have IKEA and their meatballs at home. So IKEA obviously closed in terms of their retail stores, probably doing some online retail, I would imagine. But they thought, what can we kind of give back during this time? People love our meatballs. We've never shared the recipe, so let's do that. So they shared their recipe for their meatballs for the first time. Really, really kind of tapped into their brand profile, because they've presented it in exactly the same way as an IKEA flat pack furniture instructions. So kind of quite clever, keeps the brand at the heart. They shared this recipe on social media. They've also generated more than 170 pieces of press coverage off the back of them sharing this recipe, and they're giving something back to families during this time. Something that kind of families can do. And again, it's that creating that kind of brand love during this difficult time. And then bottom right, sort of big brands, you may have heard of this campaign, National Theatre Home. Obviously theatre has been really, really kind of decimated by the pandemic. And this isn't about monetizing, but it is about kind of creating an opportunity to engage brands while also creating an opportunity to drive some revenue. So the National Theatre have taken every week during lockdown one of their most famous plays, and they have streamed it live to hugely brilliant results. So actually the first live stream was One Man, Two Governors, which stars James Corden. They had 2.6 million live streams, and this has probably gone up since I wrote the presentation. But while they don't charge for you to watch the content, they do invite donations, and this far they have had over £100,000 in donations. So again, it's another kind of clever initiative, a reason to get people talking about the National Theatre, and again, it's kind of giving something back, which makes it relevant to kind of promoting it during the time of the pandemic. So that's all very well if you're a big brand and you've got a PR team or somebody there to sort of help you kind of get that PR campaign up and running. But what about everybody else? This is a changing landscape, as we know. Every single day, kind of rules are changing. People's mental well-being is changing. What we're receptive to is changing. So it is kind of precarious. And you have to be careful. In fact, there was some research that was released yesterday that shows that 7 out of 10 people will now shun a brand that behaved badly during the coronavirus pandemic. So that is something to kind of have in your mind when you're doing something, that the brand perception is precarious at the moment. And also, don't view this as an exercise to increase sales. You may get some increase in sales, which is great, But on the most part, landing a good PR campaign now can really help and aid your return more smoothly when the opportunity arises. So it's really important that you get it right. Now, because of the precarious nature of the landscape at the moment, there are some questions that I would suggest you ask yourself first before you go out there and promote your brand, your business, your product. The first question, is this relevant? This is absolutely not the time to be trying to link yourself to the pandemic if there is no link. This has been media publicly expressed anger by brands and businesses who have tried to do this, where they have kind of been outspoken or thought that this was an appropriate time or tried to link themselves to the pandemic. It's just not appropriate right now. And in fact, I know one journalist in particular who says that she's compiling a list of people who have done this so that after the pandemic she knows never ever to work with them again. I mean, that's a pretty extreme example, but it does show that it's really, really important to make sure that it's kind of time appropriate. The second question is, do you have something valuable to add? And be honest with yourself about this. Is what you want to say of actual value, or do you have a valuable addition to the conversation? If the answer to that is yes, then it may well be the right time to promote your brand, business, product, etc. If it's not, again, don't do it. It's just not the right time. And if you're not sure, and this may sound really obvious, but go and ask a third party. Ask them whether or not they would be interested to know about this right now. And if they say no, listen to that advice because it's really important. 3, is this just a PR stunt? Now, PR stunts can be brilliant when done at the right time and landing the right message. But again, now's not the right time for a PR stunt. Nobody wants to see a brand or someone who is trying to profit off the back of a pandemic. So don't do it. If it's just a PR stunt, it's not the right time. And then 4, can you help? So you may not be able to promote your brand, your business, your service right now because it may not be relevant, it may not be valuable right now, but there may be opportunities to sort of land some promotion by extending the offer to help. Now, as long as that doesn't break yourself or break the bank, can you look to help others at this time, thus creating a promotional opportunity for yourself? And I've got a few more examples that I'll show you, one of which in particular brings that to life. So next, simple steps to starting your own PR campaign. I know that it's a lot to sort of take in, but hopefully I've kept this as simple as possible, and anyone is more than welcome to sort of follow up with me afterwards if you want any more help or advice. But these are sort of 10 steps that I've put together that I think if you were planning a PR campaign, this is the best way to go about it. So the first point is setting a goal and narrowing it down. So ultimately, this is as it would be for any marketing campaign, any marketing campaign, any social media campaign. What do you actually want to achieve? What's your objectives? Do you want to reach your new audience? Do you want to boost sales? Do you want to build a relationship? Because ultimately, what you want to achieve will distinguish how you approach your campaign, kind of what your messaging is, where you should be activating it, how you should be talking. And when you're planning this campaign, think about things like, who your audience is, your deadlines. If you've got any budget, what that budget is. 2, know your audience. Again, kind of nothing too dissimilar to how we would approach any other marketing campaign. You need to know who you're talking to because, again, that will vastly differ what your campaign looks like depending on who you want to talk to. So think about, whether you want to reach families, whether you want to reach millennials, whether you want to reach older people, and then tailor that messaging according to that audience. If you're reaching families, for example, you want to have a sort of family first message, at the start of your campaign. That's the first thing that's going to kind of hook that audience. 3, choosing the right PR platform. Where is this audience? What are they doing? What are they reading? How can you reach them? Where can you reach them? So think about how you're going to deliver that message and where it's going to be delivered. And once you know in your mind where you're going to deliver that message, then you can think about the assets that you need in order to deliver that message. So it may be a straightforward press release format. If you're looking at a website that you think that's the right fit for this campaign, you may want to think about, could you have a video asset with it? You know, the more that you can give the press, the more likely the chance is of them using it, essentially. 4, what's the story? This is really, really important, because I've worked with so many clients over the years that have said, I've got this new something, and it's just not interesting. It's just not interesting, you know, unless it's groundbreaking technology, unless it's completely innovative from one of the world's biggest brands. That's just not that interesting in itself. Go and buy an advert for that, because that's how you're going to land those messages. But it's when you start to peel away the layers about what makes that interesting. You know, is it really timely? Is it going to do families a huge, you know, kind of service at the moment? Is it going to make it easier to manage your work-life balance? Think about what that story is, because that is ultimately what is going to make your campaign newsworthy. 5, write a press release. This is kind of the easiest way of delivering your news. And it doesn't have to be overly complicated. So it may be that actually you can take some materials that you already have and turn this into a press release. It may be that you've written a blog that kind of details your campaign. It may be that you've written an e-marketing newsletter. So you can use this content, but essentially a press release is a way of putting across your idea, your PR campaign, as easily as possible. So key advice there is just keep it really, really simple. You know, really somebody needs to be able to read the first couple of sentences and know exactly what it's about. And it's really important not to assume knowledge, because I think we're all guilty of, when we know our business or our product inside out, we kind of assume that everyone else understands it as well as we do. And that's just not the case. So years ago, someone said to me, when you write a press release, you want to write it so that if you were to hand it to your 99-year-old grandmother, she should be able to understand it without any knowledge of what you're writing about. And that advice kind of stands with me to this day. I think it's really important advice. That someone should be able to read what you're writing and know straight away that's what they're writing about. You know, this is the story. And then make sure you include the kind of key kind of call to actions. You know, where do people find out more? How can they get in touch? All of those kind of information. When does something launch? And then also think about, you know, kind of any accompanying assets. You know, I mentioned already, the more that you can give a journalist, the more likely they are to use something. So think about what visuals can you use to bring that story to life. You know, it's very rare that you open a paper or a magazine these days and you see an article that doesn't have a visual. You know, if you provide a good story and you don't provide a good visual, they'll go out and find their own if they want to run it. And it may not be, you know, kind of as powerful as the visual that you perhaps could have given them. And also think about that as it's an opportunity to increase your footprint on the page. If you give people a strong story and a strong visual and they run both, well, then you've just doubled your space in the magazine or newspaper. 6, distribute wisely. This is really important. You have to know who you are targeting and why you are targeting them. So again, one of the kind of first pieces of advice that I was given when I started out my PR career was, don't send anything to a journalist without knowing that they are the right person to cover this sort of information. You know, if you were to pick up the phone to a journalist and say, this is my story, are you interested? And they say, where in my magazine, where on my website do you think this story fits? You should be able to answer that question. And if you don't know how to answer that question, then you shouldn't be targeting them just yet. So do your research. You know, have a look at where you think this story fits. You know, what sort of publications write about your business or your service or your sort of brand. Have a look where on the site does it fit? Where in the magazine does it fit? And then what reporters, what journalists are writing about this sort of content. And that is how you can focus who should be receiving your information. Building journalist relationships. Now, this is sort of the bread and butter of PR, and it's where the kind of bad PR rep came from where people think of PRs as kind of whining and dining all the time, which isn't the case at all. I wish it was the case, especially now, but it's not. But that being said, it is vitally important to get to know those journalists that you want to work with and that are important for your business and for your industry. So do spend time getting to know them. Find them on social media, follow them on social media, engage with them, look for kind of comments and opportunities that they're posting that might be relevant to you, because they need the support, just as much as you do for them to write their features and their pieces. They often rely on input from brands and businesses. So it's a really, really good time and good opportunity to start building those relationships now. And it also, the better, I guess, like any business, the better that you know somebody and the more you know what sort of thing works for them, the more honed in you can be on what you provide them. So generally, once a PR has kind of been in the business for a while and they've got those journalist relationships, it works really, really well, because they know to only send that journalist certain information that they know is relevant. And equally, the journalist knows that when an email or a call comes in from that person, they know that it's something that they should want to take or should want to listen to, because that person understands how they work. 8, track any coverage. Journalists don't tell you when they're going to, more often than not, they don't tell you when they're going to publish something, particularly if it's a news story. It's sort of easier to follow if it's an interview, for example. If you do one interview with one publication, or you might be working with talent and you place an interview with them in that publication, you generally know when it's going to happen. You kind of have that conversation. But if it's news distribution and you are sending out a press release to news desks at your local newspaper, for example, you generally wouldn't know if anything is going to be published. So it's important that you track it. And you just have to, you can set up things like Google alerts about your brand or business so that you're notified when anything goes online, by the publications if you're expecting coverage. And by all means, follow up with the journalist and ask whether or not, they were interested in the story, and if there's anything else you can give them to sort of help bring it to life a little bit more. That's another way of also building that journalist relationship. But don't be offended if you don't hear back. The reality is most journalists receive hundreds, if not thousands, of emails every day. So they can't reply to everyone. That's just not kind of realistic. And while most of them don't mind you following up, don't keep following up. Generally, if someone is going to run something, they will run it, and you don't need to kind of keep following up with them. And if they don't run it, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that, what you're saying isn't newsworthy or not of interest. It might be that they've just got something more newsworthy to run, so maybe just not right now. 9, extend the opportunity. So think about where else you can put your news story. You've issued a press release to the news desks, for example, but where else, can you post it on social media? Can you use it as content on your website? All of these things are kind of great opportunities to increase your PR footprint. And then finally, tell your customers. If you are fortunate enough to achieve some good press coverage, don't be shy about it. Tell people about it. Share that coverage on social media. Thank the journalist on social media, or tag the publication that has published that piece about you or your business. These are all kind of really, really good opportunities to kind of continue your PR footprint, really, and make more people aware of what you're doing. Lots of media titles and publications have got huge followings, as have lots of journalists. So again, by kind of engaging with them on social media in a meaningful and valuable way, it can be really, really beneficial to your business and your brand as well. So I'm just going to come on to a couple more examples of brands and businesses that have done this really well, some of which you have probably heard of. So the first is my new favourite, Joe Wicks. You've probably all heard of PE with Joe Wicks. So kind of as soon as lockdown was announced, personal fitness instructor Joe Wicks announced that every day he was going to be there for families to do a PE lesson. So he launched he does a YouTube live stream every day. And I mean, that first week or so, I think before people realised how hard the exercise was, he broke, you know, the YouTube live stream record. He achieved the Guinness Book of World Records entry. He's earned over, you know, I think latest figures are upwards of £280,000 for the NHS charities. So any money that he makes off the back of this, so through AdSense or anything like that on YouTube, he gives that all to the NHS charities. This is just one of the most successful PR campaigns I have ever seen, to be honest. And what's more, the kind of cynical PR person in me could say, you know, he's kind of doing it all for himself, but the reality is he's not. You know, I get the sense that he really, really does value what he is able to give back to the public at this time. And he has just been a sensation whenever people have talked about kind of brands and businesses that have done well in the pandemic. You know, Joe Wicks is always referenced. He was one of the first, he was one of the biggest. He finds kind of innovative ways to engage family and children. And the fact is that this is the biggest brand building exercise he will have ever done, you know, when the pandemic is over. And when he has stayed true to the fact that he has continued to stand by his pledge, he hasn't monetized it, he hasn't really benefited it from it at this point, but he absolutely will do. You know, this guy is going to be gold dust in the future. You know, any brand or business will be kind of biting his hand off to work with him, I have no doubt. And some local examples, which I thought would be interesting to share with you, given that many of you, I'm sure, are sort of Cambridge or locally based. In the bottom left, Mini Miss Bread. So she is a Saffron Walden sensation, a baker who launched not that long ago, probably about 6-8 months ago, maybe a year ago max. Set up a sourdough bakery in the heart of Saffron Walden, and obviously, sadly, as a result of the pandemic, has had to close her doors. But the way she dealt with this in terms of then creating a PR opportunity was absolutely brilliant, because she, when we went into lockdown, Megan, the owner of Mini Miss Bread, she created sourdough starter kits, which she then gave to locals. And then when everyone ran out of flour, she essentially bagged up all of her own flour supply, and her family distributed it to families all over Saffron Walden. I mean, it was just tremendous. And while she probably didn't do it for PR value at all, it absolutely has worked in that way, because people were talking about it, newspapers wrote about it. She's created huge goodwill amongst local families and businesses who, when the pandemic is over and when the restrictions are lifted, will hopefully flock back to be a customer of Mini Miss Bread, and to continue to support her in her efforts to get the business back on its tracks, as she supported locals during the lockdown. The second example is a local Cambridge artist, Harry Gray. He designed a medal that he said should be awarded to the NHS, people from the NHS and key workers who have given up, you know, so much during the pandemic. Now, what's quite interesting about this campaign is I would just point out that there was kind of the opportunity for this to be viewed as a bit PR stunty, you know, to kind of put something out for the sake of kind of generating self-publicity. But what Harry did was actually, when he shared his design of a medal, he also launched a Just Giving fund, so that he can start to kind of get the wheels in motion to make this happen. So that takes it from being kind of a PR stunt to something that is far more valuable. And again, this is something that has been picked up by local media in the Cambridge area, so kind of a great opportunity for the artist to sort of generate some word of mouth and some talkability around him, but through a cause that is very, very valuable. And then the third example is the Stephen Peirce School. The Stephen Peirce School, whose art and technology department have been making visors for the NHS and for key workers. So they've made face shields to help people during the pandemic. And these were delivered to local hospitals and care homes. From the kind of press coverage that I've seen, I think that this was undoubtedly shared with the media via a press release mechanic as well. But this is a good opportunity to sort of demonstrate how you can pivot your services if you don't have anything sort of relevant to talk about right now. You can still look to use or kind of deploy services elsewhere that can create a good, valuable PR opportunity as well. Slightly negative PR campaigns, just to sort of demonstrate the sorts of things that really we shouldn't be doing. So on the left, this is quite an interesting example. It's from a Japanese data brand who decided it was a good idea to put their data onto a kind of bottle of hand sanitizer. And this links back to what I was saying about not doing something, not trying to link yourself to the pandemic if there is no plausible link. This is just, it doesn't sit very well. It wasn't very well received. And it resulted in negative PR for the data company. So probably what they thought was kind of quirky and clever actually was tenuous and just not the sort of tactics that we should be deploying. And on the right hand side, I've just put Amazon as the example. Now, Amazon are obviously benefiting hugely from the pandemic, with everybody kind of looking to buy their online retail items through Amazon. So it didn't go down all that well when richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos, decided that he should ask people to support his Amazon relief fund, or he should ask the public to donate to the Amazon relief fund. I think when you're a man of that much wealth and so many people are struggling, it's just not appropriate. And we've probably all seen the backlash that poor Richard Branson has faced. Again, he has created widespread damnation by asking to be bailed out by the taxpayer when he himself lives in a Caribbean tax haven. You just have to think, just not appropriate. I'm sure his business has been decimated. I'm sure he does need the help, but just what he did was inappropriate. And whether or not that reputational damage can ever be repaired, I just don't know, to be honest. Time will tell. I suspect probably never to the degree that it once was. And final example, I mean, there are just no words. Certainly in the UK, if I was to pick out, perhaps the most horrific PR campaign of all, I would probably say the Donald Trump campaign during this pandemic. I mean, how not to go about promoting yourself at a time where, people are dying. He has compared the TV ratings of his official updates to, kind of popular TV shows on in America. He has, compared the kind of UK performance and how he's outperformed all of the other countries at a time that really we should be displaying solidarity. Though bizarrely, it somehow seems to still work in the US. So no comment there. And just, if now is not the right time, so if you've sort of looked at some of those questions and tips that I've shared and thought, you know what, it's just not the right time for me to be talking to the media, I haven't got anything kind of relevant right now, there are still things that you can be doing. So build your media database with relevant contacts for the future. So start to have a look. We've kind of referenced looking at the publications that write about your sort of product or service. So look at those publications, find the right journalists, track down their email address, make sure you're following them on social media. And quite often, journalists are putting shout outs on social media. So even if there's nothing proactive that you can do, there may be something reactive, especially from a small business owner perspective. These sorts of insights and experiences during a pandemic are really, really valuable to media. And often media will publicise what they're looking for on their social media channels. So that's really important. And that's something that you can do right now. And that will stand you in kind of good stead for the future. Think about your industry and how you can help. We've talked about that kind of being kind and helping others during the pandemic. So even if you can't talk specifically about your product, your service, yourself, your business, if you are able to kind of pivot and help others in the industry, you know, it will generate positive word of mouth, positive opportunities, and potentially even positive PR as a result. And then thirdly, plan for the future. So although a PR campaign may not be the right thing for you to do right now, think about what you can do when you come back. You know, what can a PR campaign look like for you in the future? Who can you target? What are the best channels for you to activate your PR campaign on? And start to kind of think about that now, so that actually when restrictions are eased further and we can sort of start to come back, you know, a little faster, a little more kind of positively, how are you going to kind of land that message to customers? You can start thinking about that now. So I hope that you've all found that helpful. And hopefully there's sort of a few hints and tips there that you can take away and use to benefit your own business and service. I genuinely do mean it. You know, my email is there, and it's an open door. So by all means, if there's sort of questions, or you just need a quick bit of advice, or you want to ask something, I'm always happy to listen and to help. So please do drop me a line. And thank you for listening. And if you've got any questions, then I'm sure Lenka will feed those through to me.
Thank you so much. This was fantastic. Such a great advice, so practical. We got a comment from Krisha who said, I'm literally getting in touch with my local paper as the book I co-authored is published today. Brilliant advice. Thank you. So really good timing with the session. I know that a couple of businesses are rethink their business model and doing some great stuff in terms of how they rethink their business, how they can support their community better. So I think that they're watching as well to try to get their kind of word out there. And I've seen a couple of great examples of local PR as well. We have a couple of questions. The first one is from Neeraj, and he says, what form of PR outreach you recommend for early stage startups, given they don't have much cash to splurge?
I think it probably depends on what you have to say. That's probably the most important thing to think of first of all. So what is it that you actually have to say? And then probably the simplest way of starting that outreach without having to invest any budget is to put together the press release that I mentioned, and then target it really, really kind of acutely at the right people. So look online at the sorts of titles that write about your industry, the sorts of writers that, you know, have written previous features or kind of comments about your industry. Most places it's sort of relatively easy to work out an email format, even if it doesn't show the specific journalist's contact details. Write up your press release, you know, in that kind of simplistic way that I've said. And I think it's quite important with startups as well. This is where that kind of information about not assuming knowledge is really, really important. You know, quite often startups might be working with a kind of complex brand product, and you have to think about explaining it really, really simply in a way that within the first 2 or 3 sentences, someone knows, I totally get it. That's what this is all about. But yeah, probably a simple press release format is the best way to go about it, but making sure you're really targeting the right people. That is the best way to kind of start generating some opportunities. And you can be creative, you know, if for example, you write to a journalist, you send them some information that is really, really relevant, you know, they're interested, you can then potentially offer them something else. So they might be interested in doing a video chat, you know, like this, that they can house on their website, where you can talk about your business in a little bit more detail. You might have some really, really great data that you could potentially offer someone, you know, even offer it exclusively, you know, kind of this is why your startup, whatever it is that your kind of startup has created, this is why it is really important now. You might have some data to support that, so you can kind of add that in. All of these layers start to kind of really define your story and kind of give that journalist something special.
Yeah. We had a great session last week with Ben Roberts, who talked a little bit more broader and strategically about owned and earned media. So he looked more strategically, not just at the PR, but the whole world of earned media. So there might be some opportunities in terms of looking for guest blogging, for being a guest on podcasts, being guest on shows that are not the traditional PR, going to the traditional media, but still going to the route of relevant bloggers, relevant influencers, relevant online sources, social media platforms, where you could get a little bit more of the earned media as well as the PR in traditional media. So if that's something that would be interested, then check out a video from last week where there is some great advice on getting in touch with journalists as well as looking at other opportunities of listing your blog posts and stuff like that. So there might be an interesting approach for a small startup as well. Another question is from Kelly, and Kelly is asking, what listening PR tool would you recommend for a social enterprise with a tight budget? I heard about Meltwater, but it is more for big companies and it's quite expensive. Do you have any tips?
Gosh, that's a tricky one. I know, do you know, in all honesty, I have the same issue myself, because having come from sort of quite big brand and business backgrounds, I've been sort of used to historically having all these resources at my fingertips that all of a sudden you work for yourself. And you don't have things like, you know, kind of Meltwater, or kind of, there are great media databases on things like Gorkana. I can't think of kind of resources per se off the top of my head. So if anything springs to mind, then I'll come back and share that later on the group. However, I would probably say that this is where that kind of research part will really, really kind of pay dividends. You know, so looking at, you know, who the right journalists are, getting their contact details together, finding them on social media. You know, kind of Google alerts are really good as well. You know, you may not necessarily want to, it may not be just about kind of generating coverage and seeing when people have written about your brand, but it might even be worthwhile setting Google alerts up for competitors. You know, what are competitors up to? You know, kind of who's writing about them, where are they appearing, and that can sort of help for you to then create your own resources. I mean, in terms of sort of day-to-day activity, I subscribe to sort of all of the regular kind of updates from the likes of PR Week is great, where you can see sort of what brands and businesses are doing in terms of PR activity, that I think is always very useful to, it can kind of spur ideas for yourself when you're seeing what other people can do. I subscribe to updates from the Drum, from Marketing Week. So, you know, kind of again, just seeing interesting kind of information. And I think probably in terms of kind of journalist requests, the most useful thing is to follow them on social media. They're all on there. They all use those channels to kind of outreach themselves, you know, to find kind of case studies for their own content. So that's probably the best way to sort of keep up to date. And, you know, once you have put together, you know, your own databases, your own resources, you only have to do it once and then keep it updated. So it's really, really worthwhile kind of putting that time and effort in to create your own databases that won't cost you anything apart from your time. So if you can find the time to do that, then it's something that will pay dividends in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially from social media perspective, there's so much opportunities happening on Twitter. If you follow the hashtag journal requests, there are journalists literally asking for this and that every single day. And that's, in a way, if you have prepared your materials, you have your story ready, you have your press release ready, you know what you want to get across, then just keeping an eye on that on a daily, weekly basis and being fairly reactive, because obviously journalists will ask today for a deadline tonight because it goes to press tomorrow. So there is a little bit of kind of being proactive and having the right timing. But if you are ready with your message and keeping an eye on those, then there's lots of opportunities, especially if it's related to a small business, if it's related to a community, if it's related to something very timely and relevant right now. There's lots of opportunities because lots of journalists are currently talking about these things as well.
Yeah,
another question. Yeah, continue.
I was just going to say, I think as well for kind of social enterprises specifically, just really think about case studies, you know, case studies, people that you may have kind of access to or relationships with. Case studies are so valuable at the moment. You know, when you open your newspaper or the website or what have you, there are so many stories from kind of people, small business owners, people that have been impacted. So if there is a story like that that you can tell and someone who's willing to talk about it, you know, really, really valuable content right now.
Yeah, fantastic. We have another question from Kelly. It's a little bit more broader, but I think it's quite interesting and it would be great to get your insight on it, Amy. Kelly is asking any advice in terms of PR and comms for someone who is setting up her social enterprise, is women-focused community for South American professional women based in Europe who want to become the best version of themselves by social skills development and networking. Should I build my personal brand first in parallel with my business brand to build my credibility kind of profile, or just focus on my business brand and community? So it's a little branding question in there as well.
Yeah, I think for something like that, it's personal brand alongside business brand, because I think, you're kind of I'm guessing, if you're kind of the face of your business, that kind of personal presentation is going to be really, really important. And actually for small businesses, a kind of a spokesperson for that business, it's kind of building your personal and your brand portfolio at the same time. So I think do the two in conjunction, and that may be that, you again kind of find the right people that will write about the sort of kind of business that you're working on. And it may be just as simple as at first, getting in touch with them, saying hi, giving them an introduction to you and what you're doing and how you can help. It's the sort of very basic step to starting off a relationship with journalists. If you can say to them, well, look, I can provide insight on these areas. If you have these sorts of stories, I can help with comment. If you're looking for these sorts of spokespeople, these are the sorts of people that I can introduce you to. I think those sorts of opportunities are really, really kind of interesting, and it's a good way to open a conversation with a journalist. So I think the two in tandem is the right way to go.
Yeah. One thing on the past question in terms of branding, we had a great talk last month with Joe Glover talking about personal branding, who talked looking at how to build a personal brand and what to do about branding and what not to do about branding. So if that's something, Kelly, that you're looking into how to build a personal brand, then I would highly recommend his talk. It's super practical. It's very, very relevant. And Joe is a great speaker, and it was great fun to actually watch the talk with him. So I would highly recommend the talk as well. One more question from Jiang. He says, will the bloggers help to bring my products to the potential customers beside journalists?
Sorry, I missed the beginning of the question. Will
bloggers help to bring my products to the potential customers beside journalists?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I haven't really mentioned bloggers, but you almost treat a blogger in the same way that you would a journalist, because ultimately they're still publishing a story. They've still got a kind of loyal following, and in fact, in some instances, particularly when you look at sort of micro bloggers where they've got a hugely engaged audience who really, really trust what they say, yes, absolutely. And in fact, I think because of the explosion of digital, the number of blogs that cover off, kind of key areas that may be of interest to your brand and business, you almost have to treat it in the same sort of way that you would a journalist, researching that blog, understanding, kind of it's the right blog for what I want to talk to them about, and targeting them in much the same way. I would say, kind of whereas with, journalists, you can sort of sometimes get away with being perhaps a little less personalised. They're very used to, press releases, for example, get sent to a news desk, unless kind of specific reporters, so you can be a little less personal there. With bloggers, they are people like you and I, and they've generally got day jobs, so I think the personal approach is quite critical there. Don't send them a kind of mass press release that you've sent to 100 other people in a BCC copy. Approach them personally, tell them what you like about their blog, tell them why it's the right fit for your product or business. So you're sort of building that relationship. You're kind of demonstrating that you're familiar with their blog, but absolutely it's another way of getting your product or your business or service in front of the eyes of a wider audience. And kind of the opportunities with bloggers, they can continue to grow in much the same way that once you understand how a blogger works and kind of what makes them tick, you can kind of create content and opportunities that will help them, while they can also then help you in taking that message to a wider audience.
Yeah, and I think you pretty much answered the next question we just got. which was, should we reach out to bloggers and influencers on IG to pitch our business?
Yeah. I mean, that's again, yeah, absolutely. Depending on kind of where their platforms are, if they're influencers, I mean, it depends, kind of the scale of influencers. If you're talking to sort of influencers where they've got 20,000 plus followers, the reality is that most of them are expecting to be paid for content. That's it's a job for them, or for a lot of them. So you have to think about, actually, do I have budget to invest in this? If it's something that actually really is of interest. So for example, I do a lot of work with family influencers, so lots of parenting bloggers, through some of my work with horse racing, and actually then yes, you can get in touch with kind of influencers in that way, because you've got something that's really relevant to them, and that which they can benefit from. So yeah, absolutely. If they're on Instagram, versus having a traditional blog, then yeah, that's the way to contact them. I think probably as well, the just key thing is that if you don't hear back from someone, don't be disheartened. It doesn't mean that what you're kind of trying to sell them or trying to kind of pitch to them isn't good. It just simply means it may not be right for them just right now, and they've had 7,000 other people asking the same question at the same time. So you have to just keep kind of being determined and try again, not with the same person. Don't pitch them the same story over and over again, but just move on. If it's not right for them, it potentially will be right for somebody else.
Yeah, I think when it comes to social media and influencers, then right now, micro influencers, nano influencers, kind of smaller influencers, smaller organizations, bloggers who have maybe smaller audience but highly engaged and highly relevant. Do your research and find, be it smaller groups but actually more engaged, are a great way to go. And if anyone has any questions about Instagram influencer marketing or influencer marketing outside of Instagram, we've had a great session, I think it was last week, with Emily, and there is a recording of her session on our website in the resources.